Hey everyone, Brian Beeler and Kevin O'Brien coming to you from the Storage View Lab, and today we're looking at something a little bit different. We've used Veeam for ages, 7, 8 years now in our lab environment for
Long
primary
time.
backup. And Veeam not long ago made an acquisition of Kasten for those that are needing to back up their Kubernetes environment. And Kasten had an update at the end of April where they added some new features around security and some additional compatibility. We don't have any containers set up in our environment right now, though, do we?
No, we have one container in a very small environment.
Right, a Ubiquity thing in Docker or
Yeah.
something? Right, and so we're somewhat like a lot of other mid-sized businesses, I think, that are used to running tons of enterprise applications, but really haven't embraced, I would hardly even say fully embraced, we haven't made much of an embrace of containers, but it's something that we're looking at. We're continuing to pursue that market and understand how these things are being deployed in the enterprise. And we're looking at a lot of test plans and such that will rely on containers for deployment. So it's something that's important, that is going to be increasingly important throughout the market. And so this interesting acquisition by Veeam really brings the Veeam sort of modality of simplicity and ease of management, that mind frame, along with Kasten, who was already headed in that direction, and lets the two march forward to handle both traditional and these emerging use cases. So like I said, at the end of April, a pretty big update in Kasten K10 V4 is available, and there's a bunch of new features that we're going to take a look at today. I want to bring in our buddy Michael Cade with Kasten. Michael, how are you?
Hey guys, yeah, I'm all good, thanks.
Good. So you were a Veeam guy, and now you're a container guy. Is that right?
Yeah, well, always a data management guy, I think is probably the best thing. And I think yeah, exactly what you guys were kind of just talking about is that so containers, some people are going down that route more so like Fortune 500 and some of the real large enterprises. I think the majority of us more, let's say, the virtualization admins, the more traditional workloads are, it still looks like a very daunting area to get into, and I think that's one of the reasons why Veeam made that acquisition was to really focus on this is a platform that is going to be around for a long time, the next wave of infrastructure, if you will. It doesn't mean that anything's going away, and I think that's the key message that Veeam are bringing as well, is that virtualization is not going away, cloud-based workloads are not going away. They're all going to live in a use case scenario for everything. So yeah, but I have most recently moved over to Kasten to focus on technical content, community, and product strategy from a cloud native point of view.
Mostly what that means to me is I see you hawking a bunch of Kasten t-shirts on Twitter. Is that your primary job responsibility?
Yeah, kind of. So t-shirts first, swag first, then it gets down into sharing all the good stuff that we're doing and how we're protecting protecting those workloads and that data.
All right, well, fair enough. But so I referenced the press release back from the end of April, and you guys have got a couple things with compatibility. You've got some application awareness updates, and then maybe something that you're most enthusiastic about. You've got some updates around immutability and ransomware. And it's funny to me because these sound like enterprise data protection issues. I mean, Rick Vanover sat in that seat twice and talked immutability over the last couple of years. And these are business problems that you're talking about. But I got to be honest, the first KubeCon I went to, I walked around in there and nobody was talking data protection. No one even uttered those words, or security, or recovery. I mean, it was all
Tough thing to do.
it's tough, but I mean, these guys were like Wild West container cowboys and and resilience. I mean, no one cared. They burned it all down. No one cared. What's changed fundamentally over the last couple of years that Kasten could even, one, come into existence and start to solve that need, and two, solve the need in a big enough way that Veeam takes them out and puts them into the greater company fold there.
Yeah, so I think it's like a a lot of my conversations are around debunking myths around, well, Kubernetes is just for stateless workloads. It's just for those containers. It's just for those web servers that we just need to host and we need to scale up, scale down, etc. But I think it's easier to lean on like the CNCF surveys, the Cloud Native Compute Foundation that they do every year. And actually, those stateful workloads are becoming more and more prevalent, if not pretty much every cluster out there has some level of state, whether that be people running databases within Kubernetes or some sort of data service within Kubernetes as a container. Think about like your MySQLs, your Postgres, etc. But then also think about another thing that we're seeing more and more of is maybe you do have the stateless application within Kubernetes, but it leverages something externally outside of the cluster using something like AWS RDS, so relational database services, and it's using that to store that state. Well, we still need to protect that data, and as much as maybe a developer, and I think more so the DevOps side of the left-hand side are definitely aware of everything can be in code apart from external data services. Like if something gets put into a database, your source code, no get operation is going to make sure that that is safe. So I think that's a fundamental reason why data management has been massively spoken about over the last maybe 18 months, 2 years from a Kubernetes point of view. And that's one of the key areas why Veeam made that strategic acquisition of Kasten, and everything else from a roadmap perspective around version 4.0 has been just a continuation on that. So we've already had things like an ecosystem integration, and from a cloud native point of view, it's very much about community. It's very much about cloud, the ecosystem. So being able to leverage some of those open source projects to create an outcome, be able to visualize or have some sort of observability, but then also being able to move data using open source tooling, etc. So, and then also very much the same as what we see in the virtualization world is being able to hook into those storage services. So the enterprise storage vendors, the public cloud storage, being able to hook into them very much like Veeam does from an agnostic point of view. It continues down into that Kasten piece, being able to hook into things like Nutanix and HPE and everything that they're doing in this same space. And I think it all comes back to, like, we've spoken about data management for years, whether it be physical, virtual, and cloud, and containers is no different really, in that if you've got stateful workloads and sometimes even stateless complex workloads, then you still probably want to have a good grasp on data management as well. And it's them same conversations, Brian, that we've been having for years around data management. It's just the same but a different platform. So it's the same but different.
So you just took 4.5 minutes to tell me that containers are the same as virtualization, and now they need to be protected.
So yeah, and in a way, it kind of is, but they also, obviously, from a footprint point of view, they have their advantages. They do have their disadvantages. That's a big spoiler alert, but they have their advantages over virtual machines. So coming from the Veeam side, where we can take any virtual machine or any image-based backup using VBR, and we can directly restore that into Google Cloud, into AWS, into Azure, that's all great. But we're talking gigs of data. Now, when it comes to Kasten and containers, we're now talking megs of data. So we've got the ability to do that same portability between multiple Kubernetes clusters, but now we're talking megs of data as well, and then application consistency on top, and being able to do all of that within a much shorter time frame for containers. So virtualization isn't going away, as I mentioned, but I think there's a strong use case from a software development and app development point of view where containers completely make sense over virtual machines.
Sure. Well, that makes sense. The background is useful, even though I'm giving you a hard time about it, because I think it's important for organizations that are looking at containers to not be fearful of the next iteration of technology, right? I mean, we saw the same reluctance by some amongst virtualization at the early days, and this is no different. We could chat forever, and that would be great. But I think what would be even better would be to see some of this stuff in action. I know you've got the new features that are available in V4, and you've got some flags if people want to turn them on. That some of the stuff isn't GA yet, so I should warn our audience that there could be bumps and bruises in this demo. But why don't we just jump into it, and you can walk us through some of this new stuff.
Yeah, so let's dive into it. And to start off with here, so I have a K10 deployment. So K10 particularly runs within the Kubernetes environment that you're protecting. So there's some caveats around that because that sounds like, well, if something bad happens to the Kubernetes cluster, well, what do you do and how do you fix that? Well, we have built-in resilience plans that allow you to offload this configuration into another Kubernetes cluster, or at least put the configuration in an offsite location. Like, we've thought about that from a wider data management view as well. But to get started with Kasten, it's a super simple Helm chart, and we're working on some other ways to make it really simple to deploy K10 within your cluster. So without going into it, but we've got options around all of the major hyperscalers, so Azure, AWS, Google, but also vSphere. Obviously, that's a growing trend as well for those on-premises Kubernetes environments, and then Red Hat OpenShift as well. So you can see various different deployment patterns here, but ultimately they're all using a Helm chart. So pretty simple one-line commands to get up and running. And then if we dive into that, once it's deployed, then we're going to dynamically discover our application. So if we go into here, you get to see, okay, I've only got one application in my cluster called my production app, and this is dynamically going to be discovered. So you've got an app running. We're going to see that in K10. Then we've got our policies, and I'll come back into here shortly for the rest of the demo. But this is where we set our backup jobs, our export jobs. And the good thing about Kasten is that we want to focus, or we have a joint focus. One is on the UI, the operations teams that need this UI to be able to manage those policies, set and forget those policy-driven policies. But then also by leveraging the Kubernetes API as well. So everything that you see in this screen can be done using the native Kubernetes API as well. So if we went in there, we can go and create these policies, we can run them, we can do everything from the Kubernetes API as well natively. And then the final card in here is around data, and this gives us a bit of an overview of what our snapshot storage looks like, what our object storage, and what the live storage looks like. And it just gives you a good overview around visibility and what's happening. And then you've got the last few activity notions around whether we're using snapshots for that first port of recovery. And again, that just depends on what that snapshot looks like, whether it's durable or whether it's not. But it's a great way, very much to what we do in the virtual world, by having a solid, fast recovery point in the same cluster on the production storage. But then we also have the export, which sends it out to object storage, and this is basically a list of all of the stuff that we have, all of the backup jobs or policies that are being run. Then if we jump into settings, this gives us the ability to set up what those exports look like. So for context here, I'm using an AKS, so an Azure AKS cluster, and I'm actually going to send all of my backup data out into AWS. So I'm going across cloud, and I'm going into a different hyperscaler. Now, you don't have to. This is purposes for a demo, but also we've got the ability to send to Google Cloud Storage, Amazon S3, Azure Storage, any S3 compatible. So if you're running the likes of MinIO or Cloudian on premises, then you've got the ability to leverage that. NFS file store, and then again, another non-GA feature at the moment is also that's coming soon, is the ability to put that into the Veeam backup server. So if you're an enterprise that is running virtualization, you're protecting that with Veeam, you've maybe got some workloads in cloud, and you're using Veeam backup for AWS or Azure or GCP, and you're using that central VBR console, then soon enough you're going to have the ability to also see those backups in that same repository. So
That's
within here,
interesting. Hey, about this the cross cloud issue, I think that's an interesting notion. Are you seeing a good demand for customers that want to operate in one cloud but back up to another in case I don't know, maybe the cloud goes down or they have some sort of outage around the Kubernetes clusters that they offer?
yeah, it's probably not as sinister as like whether clouds go down. That, like, to be fair to them, they're pretty resilient. They don't necessarily go down, but we have a lot of customers that have a lot of Kubernetes clusters spread out across multiple different managed Kubernetes services. So we might have some that are running their web servers and some applications in Azure because some of the underpinning infrastructure allows and enables better functionality. And then you might have some more data analytics type workloads and applications running in GKE, so Google Cloud. So now we've got multiple clusters being ran all over the place that enables that whole multi-cloud or hybrid cloud at least to be able to send our workloads or send our backups externally to that. And one thing that we're actually finding, and this is a feature that I've got to demo, but we also have a feature on top of this called multi-cluster that allows us to deploy K10 in all of those clusters, but manage them in one central location as well. I haven't got that to demo, but that's another thing that we're seeing more and more customers actually wanting now as well. So back to the demo. So as you can see here, that I've got a location profile, and I've got two. So I've got an AWS bucket that is purely just in London, and it's just a standard bucket. There is no retention or any object immutability. We're not using the object lock API. And the top one is where I am using the object lock API, and we can see both of those here. AWS CAS is the top one, which is the non-immutable, and then you can see the immutable version here. And I've got some of our K10 backups going to both of those. So with the powers of live demo, just to quickly run through some of these as well. So from an infrastructure point of view, if you have particular platforms as well where you're running your Kubernetes environments, some particular storage or at least like things like vSphere, then we also can have particular infrastructure profiles. This might change what that data mover looks like, how we're getting data from A to B. So we've got the ability to add those in here as well. K10 disaster recovery. So one of the things I'm going to show is around that immutability feature. So in a worst case scenario, if someone was to get into your cluster or malicious activity was to take place, because the immutability is not just there for ransomware, it's also there for malicious activity, accidental deletion, all of the failure scenarios that cause problems that you need to stop happening. We've got the ability. We've got two capabilities around disaster recovery. One is K10 itself, so we can send this application, this K10 with its catalog and all of the configuration that we've created here, we can send that to another Kubernetes cluster, and that will give us the ability to restore that configuration later on if something was to happen. If someone was to delete everything in the namespace, or delete everything in the cluster, or delete the cluster, we've still got the ability to do that. And then on top of that, we've also got the ability to export and import those applications that I first mentioned. And we can do some pretty cool stuff around automation because of that, leveraging the Kubernetes API as well. And then what else you've got in here is licenses, support, and just a few visualizations that we have from a dashboard perspective. So if I jump back, you can see here that I've got two policies created. I have the immutable policy, which is going to be sending it to my immutable location profile that I just covered. You can see here, it's all pretty simple stuff. Again, very Veeam-like, but this was all here before the acquisition. It just so happens that it was the right fit from the acquisition point of view, with very similar mantras. So we've got simple name. What do you want to do? Snapshot or import. Import is that disaster recovery that I mentioned. My backup frequency looks like this. I want to take an hourly snapshot. I want to keep 3 hourly snapshots, and you can be quite granular about how this looks. I also want to export those snapshots out to my object storage. What do you want to do? I want to do every snapshot, but you can choose, obviously, be quite granular around that. And then you've got, well, what location profile do you want to put that to? So I've got those 2 location profiles that I just covered. In this instance, it's going to be that immutability. And then you get to choose a bit more about, okay, so what are you wanting to what you wanting to export? Then you get to be more around the policy-driven approach. So in this instance, I'm just choosing the application that we've discovered, but we could start using labels, and we could start being really granular about, okay, anything that has the label MySQL, I want to use this policy. Anything that has this, or this label, that is in my goal policy, and I want to protect it on them every 15 minutes or every hour, whatever that needs to be. And we also have the application consistency item, which is something we have called Canister, which allows us to go into those MySQL pods, take an application consistent snapshot, and then allow us to have a good application consistent copy of that data in our backup. So all of that, and then all the way through this whole interface, we have these breadcrumbs just giving us that, what does that policy look like within a native Kubernetes API. So if you're going to start out as an operator and you want the UI, but you still want to have that automated approach and start learning what that looks like from API, then we're leaving breadcrumbs all the way through this. And this is something that I've seen a lot in the public clouds as well. So I've used that then to go and automate the deployment of applications and services. Well, similar to this is we want to make it easier so that this could be incorporated into CI/CD pipelines, etc., the GitOps workflows and all of that good stuff. So that's a bit of an overview of what K10 looks like, but it wouldn't be a demo if we didn't actually try and break something and show
There
something
we go.
off.
Now you're talking.
Yeah, so that's the overview. So if I now take a look at that My Production app and I go and jump in there, we should, in theory, see a list of, or my database. You can see all we've got is some names and we've got some balance, right? And what we're doing here, you saw that I have an export policy going out to that immutable backup format. And in here, I also have some attacks. So this is where I was saying about, in a real world scenario, if you did have a ransomware attack or potentially a hacker get into your perimeter and they were able to do some of this stuff, they're probably going to be more malicious. But the purpose of the demo is really to show how we can enable you to recover. So if a user was to get in or be malicious here and delete the whole cluster, that's not the end of the world. K10's still got you covered, because ultimately everything is in that immutable bucket. Now that bucket enables us to really restore those workloads in any location, but that would then mean that I've got to delete the Kubernetes cluster. We've got to then wait for me to go and build one, and it's going to take longer than this whole show to show that. So this is simulating a 2-prong approach, right? So firstly, what I want to do is I want to go and attack the database. So if this works, then I'm going to run the following.
Your own ransomware against yourself, huh?
I do that accidentally on most days.
Exactly that.
Well, that's true. I mean, Kevin's joking, but he routinely deletes stuff or wipes a drive by accident. Or, I mean, the same thing would happen with any scripts or applications too.
Yeah, when you're reconfiguring enough things, one mistake, and it's like you're expected to know more. In Linux or other OSs, they're just like, hey, well, if you say so.
Yeah, you must know what you're doing.
Okay, so there we go. So I've just encrypted everything in that database. It doesn't look particularly usable anymore, right? So that's a good start to the demo. That's one tick. So we've encrypted the database. Bad times. If we now just go and show you inside here. So, well, for starters, if I go inside of the bucket, you can see that I have a hierarchy of files and folders, and this is where all of my backups live. But what I also want to do, let's say that we actually got access to the IAM credentials to that bucket, we were able to actually attack that. So if we go and run bucket attack.sh as well, and this is the risky bit. If anything's changed in my script, well, objects deleted. That doesn't sound good. So, and then if we head back to our immutable bucket, everything's gone. So that's obviously and as if you didn't know this was going to happen. But so one of the things with this bucket, because we're leveraging the object lock API within AWS, we actually enabled versions. And although, that looks bad and everything is gone. But if we go and look at our show versions, funnily enough, our restore points are still very much under the hood and available. Now, if someone's got access to the actual IAM and they can get into the UI, then that's a different story. However, I cannot physically go and delete these files, even as the God user within AWS. AWS people cannot delete this. It would not let me go and remove this. So, so we've got a bad database, and we now don't have any database. We don't have any, in theory, we don't have any of these versions available. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump back into our application. Application's still running. No one knows any different, really, until you try and glean information from that. But what I want to do is actually go and take one of these restore points. So in blue, this is just going to go back to the last good snapshot, and this is going to go back to the last exported copy out into object storage. So when we come to export, you choose whether it's coming from a snapshot, really fast recovery, or whether it's coming from object storage. So I want to come back from object storage. I want it to go back into the original application name. Now, if you're going to do some a discovery on why and how this happened, you'd probably put that into its own application, like a clone of that. So you could give it to your security team and they can go and test and see what that looks like. We can start to do some other optional restore settings around, I only want you to bring the data back, and we can start to do some analysis around what's happened. And we can start to be quite granular about, what do you want to bring back? So in this instance, I'm selecting everything, but we could maybe choose that I only want particular artifacts, because Kasten K10 is focused on the application. So the application can consist of many different services, stateful sets, deployment, storage classes, PVCs, everything that makes up that application. It's not just one virtual machine, or not just one VMDK like we're normally seeing in the virtualization space. There's a lot of things that make up a microservice, even as just this simple little demo app that I've got. So I hit that restore, and fingers crossed down here we're going to start to see. In fact, let's take a look at get odds my namespace. I think it's called my production app. Okay, good stuff. Something's created, which is a good sign. So the restore is happening. So at this point, we're going to be pulling that data down from the AWS S3 bucket. Remember, we're in Azure, so we're running on AKS. We're running on a simple 3-node cluster in AKS, so in Azure, and we're pulling it from AWS into AKS. Yeah,
that's pretty slick. An unholy web or cloud provider alliance meshed together to protect your data, huh?
Yeah, and I think Kubernetes has a strong story in this, because Kubernetes, regardless of where it runs, is Kubernetes, right? It ultimately is based on YAML configuration files, but the difference is AWS's storage class compared to Azure's and compared to Google's is all different. So that then leads on to another area that, and while this is ticking through that, it's a good area to point out, is that we're seeing a lot of customers actually use K10 to migrate workloads and applications from one cloud, maybe it's on-prem, maybe it's another cloud, to another cloud, or back on-prem. And with K10, we've got the ability to do something called application transformation. So let's say that we're using a storage class called Azure CSI, And obviously, Azure CSI doesn't exist in Google, in GKE, or in AWS, or on premises. So, but they have maybe AWS CSI as a storage class, as a storage option. So, what we've got as part of that restore scenario is, well, you can transform that restore to say, okay, if you're going to bring it up in AWS, I want you to change that storage class to AWS CSI. So when it comes up, you can change that. And that's just one example. You could literally change everything because everything is configured. So if you wanted to bring it up with an additional 10 pods and you wanted to scale up or completely bring it down to 0, think about a disaster recovery. I want everything sat there waiting in a 0 state so that when something bad happens, I can just bring everything up. So that's really the key part to really that application mobility story that we've been telling quite a lot, is around that transformation of data and also that mobility of that data, so we can get it there from a disaster recovery point of view, but also from an application point of view as well. And you're seeing on the screen there, fingers crossed, that MySQL store, which is my database, is coming up. And provided I hit it at the right time and I didn't restore back from an encrypted database backup, we should, as soon as that does come up, we should be able to hook into that MySQL pod with the above command, and then be able to actually show you the good data being restored again.
That's a good, because that database looked like it was people that owe you money.
Yeah, exactly. It's my personal debt database. So yeah, it's,
you're running a little sportsbook action over there.
Yeah, there you go. I don't know how much I should say on a.
Well, that's good, because the Premiership's about to get going again, so you'll be ready.
So yeah, any second now we should. In fact,
but it's pretty good, because your intervention, obviously you had to kick off the restore, but the automation seems to be pretty good too.
So yeah, and we could go one step further, but it wouldn't make much of a demo. But we could incorporate this into your CD pipeline, so that if something flags that something just isn't right, and maybe you've written something that says, I'm going to scan this data to ensure that database data is actually readable, and maybe there's some like particular lines of code in that database that should always be there, and if that ever changes, you know something's wrong. So you can incorporate a dynamic recovery of that data as well as part of your automation and your GitOps workflow. So hopefully, what's it saying here? Okay, so we're still restoring, so there's no errors, so that's good. It's just the purpose of live demo. It never goes as quick as you want it to.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, though, right? Is everyone wants it fast when it's an emergency, but having it is the important bit, right?
There we go. Yeah, exactly that. So I've consolidated down this into like a 3-minute demo or 5-minute demo with a 2-minute restore, so that I can get it on main stage at our conferences and stuff like that. So that's really, really why. Like, we're only talking about a very small database, but ultimately, if you think about that in your environment, that database is probably some mission critical application data, user data, that if you didn't have, or if it was only encrypted, then it's only going to be a bad thing and the business is going to suffer, right? And that's the whole point. Is recovery might take a bit of time. We'll do it as quick as we can, but it has to be right.
Absolutely. Hey, talk about something else real quick while that's going. You were showing some of the integration points, but there was also an update recently that got your platform in the Red Hat marketplace. What does that mean for your end users?
Yeah, so there's marketplaces popping up all over, especially with the managed service providers. So anything in the Azure marketplace where we are as well, but in the Red Hat space in particular, OpenShift can live on premises, it can be part of a cloud, and it's quite a unique UI. If anything, it's the most probably the richest UI that I've seen from a management point of view when it comes to Kubernetes. There's others obviously playing in this space, and not everyone wants to be in the CLI, and not everyone wants to be using an API to drive everything. And so it was important for us as well. We had a lot of customers. We have a lot of customers using OpenShift, and it's important for us to be part of that ecosystem so that our customers can go and download the latest supported version of Kasten within the marketplace. In this instance, within the Red Hat OpenShift marketplace, and go and deploy that and use all of the best practice, all of the like, it's already been vetted by both us and by Red Hat, so it's super secure and it's ready for action in those particular environments. And it's also the easy button. You don't have to go and run a Helm chart. I mean, you can still do that, but there's also some other like settings and strings that you can use that are completely focused on OpenShift that are there. So yeah, hugely important. Also in the Azure marketplace, and obviously looking at others around that as well. And magic.
Anything you can do to make it easier from the consumption model. I mean, the Veeam guys have done that for ages, so it's neat to see that here as well.
Yeah, exactly. And as if by magic,
we got the bookie database is back.
Yeah, we're good. I can go and get that big sum of money off Edward, and everything will be good.
If that is his real name.
Yeah. Yeah, so hopefully that highlights one of the upcoming K10 features, gives a bit of an overview of what K10 is and what it's about. I think like you guys mentioned at the top of the show around, like, you've been around Veeam for a long time. I know we've spoken, Brian, quite a lot about Veeam, and I think how Veeam started that agentless approach within vSphere is quite a nice and similar analogy to what we have here with Kasten, is that it's focused on the Kubernetes API. It's built for cloud native. It's built for Kubernetes, and I think that's the big differentiator for us, as well as being agnostic. And all of those similar, those simple, flexible, reliable like mantras that we have at Veeam is very much the same thing within K10.
Well, it comes through. Thanks for walking us through the new features. I think seeing them is really worth the time and effort for those that are interested. I mean, the bullet points on the site are great, but seeing them in action is even better. And we will put a link into the description of the video to Kasten. There's you can get access to labs, to demos, to trials. So if you want to play, they're making it very easy to get in there and get going. So definitely check that out. Michael, thanks for the time. Really appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for having us.
All right. Very good. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.